I have just finished a PhD at Curtin working on how urban rail can advance great cities of the future, particularly taking the perspective that once we know what a great future city looks like, we need to understand how we can leverage our investment in infrastructure to achieve those outcomes. One of the most interesting things about looking at theory and practice, if you like, is studying how the translation of a really good idea ends up in a really powerful reality. So, for example, just to invest in rail infrastructure by itself is obviously a great thing because it can help our carbon footprint, it helps us to be a more efficient city. But if we don't combine it with a really fantastic transformational urban outcome, we leave a lot of the real benefit, the enduring, lasting legacy on the table. So my research has really been looking at the principles we need to adopt if we want to create these major transformations that have enduring benefit over time. How do we leverage the investment to the best effect? So to create a really powerful transit-oriented urbanism outcome, you've got to have a vision for the future. And that vision for the future is essentially about a great urban place. So how do we make sure that we're using our investment in that transit infrastructure, whatever the technology is, to promote better outcomes socially, economically, culturally, and environmentally? And ideally, we've got to make sure that the vision that we have in our head is one that's shared between the public sector or the government, the private sector or the developer, and ultimately the community who's going to live in that place for a long period of time. And I think it's quite interesting, one of the ideas that radical planning talks about often is who has the vision, who has the power, and who lives with the consequences. So it's really important that all three participants come together to make sure we have a shared idea of what success is going to look like. So of course, having a great vision is only really 50% of having a great solution. If we can't translate that into a reality in a reasonable time frame, then many of the benefits get lost along the way. Governance is an incredibly important part of this. So having a mechanism by which the public sector and the private sector are able to combine the things they do best to create really powerful outcomes. So potentially part of that comes from the way in which we choose to procure a project. So have we really thought through whether we're bringing together the infrastructure investment with the urban development outcome in the same package? Or have we at least got a mechanism that allows the two procurement processes to speak to each other successfully? The second thing that's really important is timing, and the impact of time really can't be underestimated because it's a long-dated exercise to create a new bit of transport infrastructure. And development is also a long-dated exercise, and both of them are susceptible to different kinds of disruption. So we want to make sure that we're planning to have development in place by the time that the first train, arguably, comes along, or else we're in danger of losing that opportunity for value capture when it's at its most powerful. In Australia, I think we've got to a point in time where we've got to be a lot more innovative in how we think about using our transport investment. So we've had a bit of a tendency to see the downtown area of a city or its CBD as being the preeminent place, and all forms of transport, whether it's public transit or car-based, all roads lead to the city centre. But increasingly, as we have more polycentric cities and we have more distributed movement patterns, we want to make sure that people are able to move from wherever they live to wherever they work, study, or want to spend their leisure time. And that means two things. First of all, that we have more orbital movements because not everybody wants to go to the city centre every day or even have to pass through it to go somewhere else. And secondly, it means we may have a lot more short trips because people perhaps are going to do something at home, they then go to a workplace, they go to study, they go to play squash or to swim in the evening, they go to meet their friends, 5 different locations across the course of a day. And we don't want people using their vehicles to make such short trips. So I sort of feel that we've got to the point where mid-tier transit is like a superpower, something that can really overcome a lot of the social and environmental problems that we're experiencing as we grow, but at a relatively reasonable cost, and it's quite agile, so it's something we can also install faster, which means we can bring forward those benefits. At this point in time, particularly, the idea that a mid-tier transit can support an uplift in density in some of these key locations means we can also bring forward the urgent requirement for more housing in places where housing is well supported by public transport and by amenity. Mid-tier transit does enable land value, At the moment, we don't really have as much data on the mid-tier transit systems as we've got on traditional forms of transport, and potentially that's one of the things that's inhibiting both private sector and public sector uptake of this kind of technology. But we do know that land value, that rental values, that yields alongside transit stations within the 400 to 800 metre radius of those transit stops, whether they're a light rail, whether they're a trackless tram, or a little bit further if they're a metro rail solution, the land value goes up, the opportunity for increased density and increased yield actually out of those sites goes up, and we tend to improve our rental values as well. So from a commercial premises perspective, they become more valuable. But it's not just that, it's also the opportunity for the economic activity that happens in those locations to also become higher yielding, so more productive, of greater value. And the opportunity to support a greater mix of use further enhances that. But only, and I really say this advisedly, if we make sure that we're also building quality of place. So we want to make sure that those urban places around the transit stops are also great places, places people want to be, that are sticky, we might say in placemaking terms, where people choose not to just come and go, but actually want to stay and dwell. That's another way in which we're able to create additional value that can be captured in economic and commercial terms. One of the interesting things about the development industry is we actually have great depth of expertise in Australia, and obviously as a director in a professional services company I'm very lucky because I get to work across a number of private sector developers at all scales and also a lot of building companies. And the reality is we have huge depth of international exposure and expertise. So we've learned things by working in Europe, in the US and Canada that we're able to apply here. The challenge is the framework for sharing risk and reward. So how is it that we're able to bring together a government at any level and a developer in a way that is actually fair and reasonable, without apportioning too much of the bring forward cost to one party or another, and ensuring everybody gets a fair proportion of the take-out profit? So I think more conversation between parties before contracts come to market is absolutely essential. We want to make sure that everybody has understood what needs to be done and that we have a mechanism that allows everybody to play to their strength over a long period of time. Sadly, I have never actually been involved personally in a collaborative contract, but I've looked at lots through the prism of advising clients whether this is a good thing to enter into or not. It takes a long-term commitment, a healthy respect, a trust, a genuine commitment and desire to collaborate to make those kind of arrangements work. But if we don't do that, we simply won't be creating transformative outcomes in a way that we can afford or at the speed that we need. So to move forward towards the transformations that Australian cities urgently need, we need to be working differently, more collaboratively, and in a greater, more trusting environment.